letter written by Arnold McMahon less than 8 months after the battle here at Chickamauga. Sir, having been a prisoner of war in the hands of the enemy, I was unable sooner to report the part taken by the 21st Regiment Ohio Volunteer Infantry, 3rd Brigade, 2nd Division, 14th Army Corps in the Battle of Chickamauga, fought on Saturday and Sunday, September 19th and 20th, 1863. At 12 o'clock on Sunday, our regiment was assigned a position upon a curved ridge, our front being south. A deep ravine was in front on the ridge, and on our right heavy timber. On our left an open field with timber beyond. There was an old house about 200 yards to our rear, which was subsequently occupied by our wounded. Our effective support in this division consisted of the 22nd Michigan Volunteers and 89th Ohio Volunteers on our right, troops under command of Colonel Walker of the 31st Ohio Volunteers, and 9th Ohio on our left, and the 2nd Minnesota Volunteers in reserve. I have not learned any name by which this position may be designated, therefore have substituted a description of it. Immediately after taking position, the enemy's skirmishers engaged us. In a short time, a strong force moved against us. A severe engagement resulted in the repulse of the enemy. This demonstration of the enemy for the occupation of this important position was made before the arrival of support heretofore stated, and though superior in numbers, he was able to endure the repeated volleys of our superior arms, the Colt's revolving rifles. Heavy skirmishing continued until 2 o'clock, when the enemy again made an attempt to carry this position, in which he failed. Our position was maintained, however, with severe loss in killed and wounded. At 2:30, Lieutenant Colonel Stoughton, who was commanding the regiment until this time, was severely wounded, and the command devolved upon myself. By 3 o'clock, every effort had failed to procure a further supply of ammunition. Orderlies sent to report our condition and position to Colonel Sirwell, commanding our brigade, and to General Negley, commanding our division, and to obtain ammunition, returned without being able to accomplish the object for which they were sent. Our brigade had retired in the direction of Chattanooga. I was unable to communicate with General Negley, and no general officer was designated to whom I might report, but we continued to hold our position. The cartridge boxes of our killed and wounded were carefully searched, also the hospitals for any ammunition that might be carried there, and carriage boxes of our wounded, and by this means obtained sufficient ammunition to meet the enemy in a third assault upon our position about 5 o'clock. In this assault, the enemy crossed the ravine in our front, and his banners up the hill within 20 yards of our line. He was repulsed and did not retire in good order. During the afternoon, a battery had range upon our position, inflicting some damage upon us, also setting fire to the leaves and brush in our front, and the enemy advanced under cover of the smoke. The wounded, under cover of our fire, were removed. A heavy line of skirmishers continued to annoy us, and a sharp fire upon this line exhausted our ammunition a short time before sundown, at which time the 2nd Regiment Minnesota Volunteers relieved us. A further search for ammunition, resulting in finding 1 round each for the men composing my command, which had now become very much reduced in number. At this time, Colonel Vanderveer, who assumed command, ordered me to occupy a position on the extreme right, from which a part of our line had just been driven by the enemy. In obedience to the order, we occupied the position and captured 9 prisoners. A sharp fire from the enemy forced us back, but we regained our position and held it until dark, at which time a brigade of 4 regiments, under Colonel Trigg, moved upon us and overwhelmed us. Simultaneous with this movement of the enemy, which was upon our right flank and rear, we received fire from the enemy, who also opened on our left, which took effect both upon the enemy and our right and ourselves. During the misunderstanding thus occasioned, a part of my men escaped under cover of the night. Colonel Vanderveer having withdrawn the troops under his command, my command was unsupported, and both flanks were exposed. Thus we lost our stand of colors, which were made sacred to us by the blood of many comrades who fell in their defense and for their honor on other fields, as well as on the unfortunate field of Chickamauga. Great credit is due the gallant officers and brave men of my command for their soldier-like bearing and good discipline, who stood by their colors and contested the fortunes of the day to the bitter end. I have the honor to report that my regiment did the last firing upon and offered the latest resistance to the advance of the enemy, which he received, and which was checked his progress and ended the Battle of Chickamauga. Having been separated from my brigade and division commanders without orders, and not being in communication with any other general officer, I was not informed of the movements of the army and held my regiment too closely engaged for the nature of the contest at dark. The reference made to other officers and troops than those under my command is not intended as a report of their conduct on the field, but to describe the position of my own command. Yet I would be pleased to note the gallant conduct of the troops I have mentioned. Our losses were as follows: killed and died of wounds, 1 officer, 47 enlisted men. Wounded, 3 officers, 98 enlisted men. Prisoners, 12 officers, 104 enlisted men. Rounds of ammunition expended, 43,550. We moved into action with 22 officers and 517 men with rifles. Very respectfully, Arnold McMahon, Major, 21st Regiment, Ohio Volunteer Infantry. I'm here today to specifically remember the men killed, wounded, missing, and captured captured at Chattanooga of Company C, the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry. They are as follows: killed, Private Sidney Brewster, who was carried from the battlefield on September 19th by my great-great-grandfather. Private William Collins. Missing, Private William Hockenberger. Wounded, First Sergeant Augustus Beesenson, Sergeant Thomas Cook, Corporal James Hopper, Corporal James Leaf, Private James Beesenson, Private Thomas Crook, Private William Franks, Private Henry Hickson, Private Charles Lundy, Private Frederick McLargan, great-uncle of the Civil War historian Dan Masters, Private George Richardson, and Private Benjamin Van Camp, a cousin of my great-great-grandfather. Captured on that day are the following: Captain Arnold McMahon, First Lieutenant John V. Patterson, Second Lieutenant Asa C. Spafford, who died while prisoner in Columbia, South Carolina, Sergeant George Washington Clutter, who was wounded and captured, and the following privates: Private Manning M. Abbott, Private John Astling, who was wounded and captured, Private Reason Bates, Private Dennis Byron Bentley, who died while prisoner in Belle Island Prison, Private Charles W. Beesenson, who later died of his wounds, Private Hiram Bordner, Private George Caswell, who died in Andersonville, Private Herbert Crook, who died at Belle Island Prison, Private Andrew Denst, who survived Belle Island and Andersonville, Private Robert Ireland, who died at Belle Island, Private Henry Limbrick, Private Francis McMahon, Private John Moreland, who died in Danville Prison, Private Franz Pienert, who died in Andersonville, Private Thomas Plemon, who was wounded and captured, Private Benjamin Rhodes, who survived Belle Island and Andersonville, and Private Harvey Spencer, who died in Danville Prison. Finally, my great-great-grandfather, Private Abram Vance Smith, who was captured here 160 years ago at the age of 17. He spent 3 weeks in Belle Island Prison, 4 months at Danville, 8 months in Andersonville, 4 months in Florence, 1 month in Charleston, followed by time at Goldsboro before being paroled in March of 1865, just months before his 19th birthday. We honor all of those souls for whom the battle here 160 years ago was a simply horrible day. Thank you.